Hello everyone. I'm just going to give you a brief video right now on how to use sensory items for your own mindfulness practice or for facilitating mindfulness sessions in a group. So, what I'll talk about today is I will just give you a brief recap of what mindfulness is. I will then talk to you about what it means to use sensory items in a mindfulness practice. And then I'll take you through some items and give you some tips and tricks for how to do it. So, mindfulness practice, I hope you remember, is just about being in the present moment. It is just about slowing down and really engaging with the experience that you're having in that moment. That means paying attention to your five senses and also paying attention to your internal experiences, your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily sensations. Now, the reason why we develop a mindfulness practice is two main reasons. One, being very mindful in the moment can allow us to really appreciate, really savor an experience that we're having. So for example, if I have a mindful eating session and I eat my meal very mindfully, I slow down, I pay attention to the smells, the tastes, the way it feels in my mouth, I pay attention to my thoughts and my feelings whilst I'm eating my dinner. I don't allow myself to be distracted by my phone or the television, lots of conversation with other people. And what will likely happen is I will find myself really enjoying that meal a whole lot more than I would if I was just quickly eating it whilst doing something else. The second reason why we develop a mindfulness practice is because it allows us to get a little bit of space between our experience and the next action we want to take. So if I'm being quite mindful, I become aware of my thoughts and my feelings and my bodily sensations, but as an observer, as someone who can see the thoughts and feelings and bodily sensations, see what's happening around me, but with just a little bit of a buffer zone that lets me decide how I'm going to react to those experiences. So rather than being pulled along by my thoughts and my feelings and what my body is doing, I can take a step back and decide what I want to do. Now, anyone who has ever found themselves waking up in a bad mood with a headache and then going on to pick arguments with their loved ones, you might have an idea of what I mean about being able to get a little bit of space between your experiences and choosing how you want to respond. Mindfulness can give us a little bit more control over how we react when things are quite difficult for us. So if you're working with clients or patients or service users who struggle, for example, with anger or anxiety or depression, it might be a little bit clearer for you of why developing mindfulness skills can help them to continue to live a full and meaningful life, even whilst dealing with those challenging internal experiences. Okay? So, the second thing that we wanted to think about is what it means for something to be a sensory item. So when we're talking about sensory items, quite simply, we're talking about any item that captures the attention of our senses. So these can be items that have a particular taste, a particular smell, a particular sensation or feel to them, things that have particular sounds, or that just feel a particular way when we're using them. So things that involve our body and our body movement. Okay, that's that sixth sense floating around. So these might be things like something as simple as a very soft makeup brush. This is just a Kabuki brush, but it is an incredibly soft brush. And it's also something that people don't as often sit around and play with. So it has quite a novel feel. So when you're picking sensory items, what you're doing is you're choosing things that immediately catch your attention and that can hold your attention. Okay? So these are things that have different sensations as well depending on how you're using them. So if I was presenting this Kabuki brush to a group, for example, I might get people to slow down and pay attention to what the brush looks like. I might get them to think about what are their thoughts as soon as they see this brush. And then I might guide them into what does it feel like against the back of your hand compared to the palm of your hand. And slow it down so that they're really focusing. What does it feel like if it touches the side of your face? Okay? So things that have feel, different touch sensations, Kabuki brushes, also feathers. Feathers are also quite interesting in terms of they capture our attention with the look. If you really slow down and look at a feather, they're really quite amazing. And there's a lot of things you can capture with your body. For example, I'm sitting in a camera, which means my heart rate is probably a little bit higher. You can see that the feather moves with the pulse of my finger. That can be a really interesting link when you're working with others, to say, can you hold the feather very still? If you can't hold the feather completely still, why not? Is it possible something's going on inside of you? And this becomes a way for us to use that sensory item, that thing that's capturing our senses, and link it back to our internal experiences, which is quite an amazing thing to do for people. There's things that we touch. There's also things that we look at and hear. For example, this is what I would call a sensory bottle. They're called all sorts of things, but essentially it's just water with glue, soap, or glycerin that slows down the flow of the water, makes it more viscous for the nerds out there. It's also got different kinds of glitter and coloring and beads in it. So as you move this, I'm not sure if the mic will pick it up, you can hear it. So it's got different sounds depending on how I'm moving. And the flow of glitter and confetti inside changes depending on how I feel. And they become quite mesmerizing. So they're quite nice. They're nice for you just to have by your desk, if I'm completely honest. But they're also really good in a group to get people to slow down and pay attention to what's going on in their own hand. The sense of smell is one that doesn't get used as much. It just seems harder to sort of control smells in a group scenario. A good way around this, scented stickers. The classic scratch and sniff sticker, which is very evocative of our childhood and something that people don't tend to experience that much of when they're adults, makes for a really great sensory item. What I do with the scented stickers is, before running a group, I put one sticker on a post-it note and then put a series of post-it notes stuck together, so that as we're progressing through the exercise, they can peel off one, scratch it, take a few minutes just to experience that scent and the thoughts they're having when they experience that scent, and then put that piece of paper away and have the next one. If you start, the one that I want is quite foundational for all of my groups, is the humble bubble. For a variety of reasons, people really love bubbles, a lot more than you're expecting them to. I've yet to have anyone in a group not enjoy blowing bubbles. When you do a sensory exercise with bubbles, I would always recommend that you slow down before you even open the bubbles up. Get people to slow down, take a look at what the bottle looks like, get them to really focus on what it feels like to touch the bottle. It's just a way to get them to really capture into all of their senses before they get quite overwhelmed by the bubble experience itself. The thing about bubbles is, one, they're very childlike. It immediately sort of evokes that feeling of being quite young and innocent, and it allows some of our patients, clients, and service users to sort of tap into those feelings and memories. And it's also something that it's to do with the breath and the body, so you can get them to notice what their body feels like as they're blowing the bubbles. It involves, if you have other people in the room, hearing their peers around them blowing bubbles, and also, of course, seeing the bubbles that they're blowing. So it becomes something that is a really, really good group mindfulness exercise. I love this one. Please, please use bubbles at some point if you're facilitating a group. Now, once you've started with the slightly easier slime, these items, you can start getting a little bit more advanced. So using sensory items or toys that involve movement or motion, like, for example, spinning tops or cup and ball. Now, only a very foolish person would try to record herself doing a cup and ball. And I think you know I'm going to attempt it, because that's exactly what I would do. But before I shame myself, to think about why this is such a useful sensory item, it's all about using the motion of your body. You have a rhythm, a movement that you have to pay attention to. If you're distracted with cup and ball, you're not getting anywhere. You have to really look at what's happening. It also has a lovely sound. It has a lovely feel in your hand. It just gives people a lot to pay attention to. It is very hard to be distracted by thoughts about your past or your future when you're trying to do. Wouldn't it have been great? Wouldn't it have been great if I'd gotten that in one go? I'm not going to get it in one go, so let's give up. So these are a great one to use. Of a similar line is this old-fashioned toy. This is a blowpipe and ball. If you are watching this because you're part of my team and I've given you one of these, you'll notice that each of the pipes have a balloon, the sort of mouthpiece of a balloon on them. That's so that they can very easily be disinfected in between use. If you are not from my team and you're watching this because you want to do sensory items on your own, balloons. They're wonderful. So this is another item that uses the breath, which means you really have to focus, but it also involves sort of your eyes getting caught by what other people are doing, the sound of people breathing around you, and your own attention being captured on what your ball is doing. So this is what it looks like. And as you go, you can see people trying to blow the ball higher, trying to make sure it never drops, all of that. So when you have a slightly more advanced group that you know isn't just going to pitch these balls all around the room, this is a really good sensory item to use. Alongside with the slightly more advanced, but also if you have a bit more room, is a ribbon and wand. So if you have space for people to stand up, this is an incredible item. People love these. Because, first of all, it's just beautiful. So what you end up with is, you know, just ribbon that you can play with, but also the sound of it. The sound of that snap that you can get when you get space. The thoughts that you have, they can be quite dreamy, quite childlike. People tend to really enjoy the ribbon on the wand. So these are just a few of the sensory items that exist. There are also use your imagination. There are kaleidoscopes, there are rattles, there are bubble machines that you can use to compare what it's like to blow bubbles yourself versus having them fill the room. There are light machines that can let you do the same. There are a whole series of different things that you can try out. You are limited only by your imagination, sometimes by your budget, but I will say these things tend to be quite cheap. So those are some of the things you can do. Now I just want to give you a couple of tips and tricks for being quite successful with running a sensory item group or for doing it for yourself. And then I'm just going to let you get out there and do it yourself. The first tip that I would give you is slow down. Slow way down. However slow you think you're being, slow it far further down. Because if we use the example of the brush, what we want is for the person who's experiencing the sensory item to have a lot of space to really connect with what they're feeling. Now, whilst I'm talking to you and using the brush, my attention really isn't on it. There's a little part of my brain that's saying, oh yes, the brush is touching me, keep moving, are you making eye contact with the camera, are they under... It's not mindful. So what you want is to give a lot of empty space, a lot of silence for people to really engage with what they're doing. If you just hand someone a brush and you say, okay guys, brush it on your hands, do it until you're bored, okay, and then stop. People are going to do it very quickly and then out. And that isn't what we want from a mindfulness exercise. So the first thing is I would say sort of choose how much time you want the exercise to last, 5-10 minutes, and then slow it down so that you are talking less than you're sitting quietly. Okay? What we want is also just a little bit of guidance. So we might say to people, now notice what the brush feels like on the back of your hand. And whilst you're doing that, notice what thoughts come to you. And then sit with silence. Notice what feelings are coming to you. What's your mood whilst you're doing this? Sit with silence. Once you've held the silence for a bit, you might help the people in the group by giving some ideas. You might say, do you find yourself bored or irritated? Do you find yourself feeling calm, relaxed, content? Then hold the silence. Always, always, always hold silence after you ask a question. Depending on what group you're working with, if you have people who are quite distant from their ability to connect with their thoughts and feelings, give them even more silence, because it's unusual to try to connect with your feelings and thoughts in that way. So tip number 1, slow way down, hold lots of silence. The second tip I would say is, whatever exercise you're doing, do it yourself. So oftentimes when we facilitate a group, we sort of like to sit to the outside of it a bit and just have that element of control in the group. When you're doing a mindfulness exercise, I would always, always, always recommend that any activity that you're asking people to do, you're also doing yourself. Part of that is that in mindfulness and further into ACT, what we do is we model. We model to people what it is to be mindful, because it's very experiential. Becoming more mindful is easier when you can see other people doing it and other people knowing how to encourage you to do it. So when you get to the end of a sensory exercise, you always have a debrief and you say, okay, so what did we notice? What feelings did we experience? What thoughts were we able to capture? What did we notice about what our senses were telling us? You should always answer those questions as well. So if I'm greeted with silence after I say, okay, so we've just used the feathers, what did we notice while that was happening? And if there's a lot of quiet in the group, I might say, I noticed I couldn't hold the feather completely still. And then I noticed thoughts about why that was. And now I can wait and say, what did everybody else notice? So that second tip, always engage yourself, is so important. Now, if you're sitting there and thinking, well, okay, but Jess, how is it practical to try to do both? It's not practical, but it's still important. So when I facilitate a group with one of these, for example, I will explain to people before we start. I say, before we even touch anything, let me explain to you what we're going to do. So then as we begin to guide, I can do both. I can say, okay, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and blow. And I will let people start. And then I might do a couple of blows myself, and then I will say, notice your thoughts, and go back to blowing. Come back in and say, notice what you're feeling. What's the emotion for you? And then go back to blowing. But if you think about how that flows, by the very nature of the fact that I'm doing it myself, it slows me right back down. So taking me right back to that first tip of slowing down by whatever means necessary is always a good thing in the mindfulness group. The third and final tip that I will give you is one that I always think is quite interesting because it makes me sound mean, but I will say this. The third tip is use a range of sensory items regardless of whether or not the people in your group or you yourself like that particular item. So there will be all sorts of sensory items that you just don't like that well. Feathers, for example, I love, and yet I always have at least one person in every group who finds it kind of creepy, who just hates the feeling of it, hates the sensation of everything to do with feathers. And when the feather comes out of the box, they are not excited. Third tip, always do it anyway. Always encourage your participants to do it anyway, and encourage yourself to not avoid the one sensory item that you think no one is going to like because you don't like it. The reason for that is in that very early definition of mindfulness. At no point did I say to you, mindfulness is relaxation. I didn't say to you, mindfulness is enjoying yourself. I said mindfulness is about experiencing richly what's happening to us in the present moment. What happens to us in the present moment is not always a massage and a happy day. Sometimes what's happening to us in the moment is unpleasant or boring or just a bit weird. We need to be able to comfortably sit with and encourage our patient service users or clients to comfortably sit with even things that they don't particularly enjoy. So, if you have someone in the group who says, I don't want to do the feather anyway. And when they're talking about why they don't want to do the feather, say exactly what I've just said to you. You are building a skill. Sometimes when we're building a skill, it's a lot of fun and we enjoy it and it's a hoot. Sometimes when we're building a skill, it's less enjoyable. Regardless, the skill is being built. Please go and practice your own daily mindfulness exercise, including things like mindful walking, mindful eating, mindful showering, and have a good time using sensory items for yourself. And please do have the confidence to try doing a mindful group by yourself.